So today we reflect on the dilemma that all of us face in our lives with respect to the salvation of our loved ones. Sometimes when we look at our situation, we find that our loved ones, could be our spouse, could be our children, relatives or friends, they have lost their faith in God, maybe because of certain crises, certain bereavement, or sometimes because they have lost faith living in a very secularized world and influenced by today's understanding of certain lifestyle, and they cannot agree with the church. And of course, we feel sad that our loved ones are not with us in the same faith. And sometimes we wonder, will they be saved at the end of their life? And so this was the kind of dilemma that St. Paul was facing. Because St. Paul, he was a Jew. And everywhere he went, when he proclaimed the gospel, was always first to the Jews. And then to the Gentiles. And what caused him great sadness was that his own fellow Jews did not accept the gospel. And for those who did, they still were very restrictive in the way they accept Christ, still very much reliant on the Mosaic law, so much so that they could not accept the Gentiles into the Christian community. So St. Paul was frustrated with this situation that he was in, that his own people did not accept the gospel, whereas the Gentiles did. And sometimes we all know very well that we could bring other people into the faith except people of our own kind, except people that are supposedly close to us. We have no difficulties trying to convert others, but with people who are our own loved ones and relatives, we find it so difficult to bring them to the Lord. And that is why in today's first reading, St. Paul was kind of reflecting, how could this be? Why was the situation like that? And as St. Paul tells us in today's first reading, he said, "My sorrow is so great, my mental anguish so endless, I would willingly be condemned and be cut off from Christ if it could help my brothers of Israel, my own flesh and blood." This could be the way we feel too for our loved ones who have not yet accepted Christ. And what is even more difficult to accept is this, especially for those of us, we have tried our best to bring up our children according to the faith. And sometimes we look at our young people, look at our own children. Many of them, by the time they finish their confirmation, they will have stopped going to church. And if they enter into college and tertiary, they lose their faith altogether. And so we ask ourselves, what has gone wrong? Did we not bring them for catechism classes? Did not we bring them for worship on Sunday together? Did we not try to share our faith with them? Did we not try to ensure that they have a good Catholic education even, going to Catholic schools? And then with all these, they still have lost their faith. And that is what St. Paul was asking, the same question. His own people, they were adopted as sons. They were given the glory and the covenants. They had all the privileges, in other words. The laws and the riches were drawn up from them. Promises were given to them. They came from the patriarchs. They had all the privileges. And yet, they did not turn out to be the way that God wanted for them. And so, it was difficult for St. Paul to accept this reality. And also the question is, we ask further, would these people be saved or not? So this is really the mystery of grace, which we might never have the answer. But perhaps the letter of St. Paul and the gospel will give us some directions with respect to this dilemma in our life, of wanting our loved ones to share our faith, but at the same time, we know that unless we have faith in Jesus, we also cannot be justified, cannot be saved. So how could these people be saved? Well, in the letter of Romans we have read so far, we come to appreciate that justification is by the grace and mercy of God. As St. Paul tells us in Romans and in chapter 5, he says, if one man has died, and Adam has caused all men to sin, what would be the second Adam could do but to raise all to new life? So we know for one thing, for sure, is that God desires all to be saved. And that God reaches out to every one of us in His own ways, in His own time, perhaps not within our own reckoning. Even sometimes when we feel that our loved ones have gone astray from the Lord, or even living licentious lives, and we wonder how these people, what will happen to them. In today's gospel, it is significant that God always reaches out to sinners, no matter who they are, even His own enemies. We are told that on the Sabbath day, Jesus had gone for a meal to the house of one of the leading Pharisees. Even his enemies invited him, he went. He didn't go and visit his good friend, Martha and Mary and Lazarus. One of the leading Pharisees. And he knows that once you go to the enemy's camp, goodness, how you eat the food, maybe poison even, we do not know. And he was open, he was receptive. He went to the house. And then, of course, we know that there was this man with dropsy. And he cured the man. And the other Pharisees of them, of course, he was not the only, he was the only one, and the rest were all Pharisees. They're all their friends. And they would be looking at him, and he had the courage to let them know. Because for the Pharisees, what was most important is to observe the laws, and then you will be saved. And Jesus exposed their hypocritical kind of standards, He says, for these men, we cannot heal on the Sabbath. But suppose if one of your animals, domestic animals, or ox falls into a well, you quickly pull him out. Even on Sabbath day, you never have thought, you cannot pull it out, but you pull it out because why? It's expensive, One ox costs lots of money. You don't save the ox, you will lose. When it comes to monetary calculation, no issue, no issue. Quickly save the ox. But who is more precious, the ox or the man? Of course, the man is more precious than the ox. But that's why I say this double standard. So perhaps from today's gospel, we can understand that God values us more than what we think. And yes, we respect the laws, and the laws we need to obey, but we never really know the mind of God. God can save us beyond the laws. We just have to surrender our loved ones to the Lord, knowing that somehow God, in His own ways, own time, will somehow save them, because God desires all to be saved. How? Actually, we really do not know. But we can trust in God's mercy and love. That is why, almost come to the end of the letter of St. Paul. St. Paul said something after explaining all this dilemma. He said, how rich are the depths of God, how deep His wisdom and knowledge. Impossible to penetrate His motives or understand His methods. Who could ever know the mind of the Lord? Who could ever be His counselor? Who could give Him anything or lend Him anything? So let us not confine and to limit the grace of God working in our lives. Humanly speaking, we know this is the way, but God doesn't have to respect the laws that we have, the parameters that we have set up. God is sovereign. He can go beyond all these things. And who are we to question Him? So let us, even in our difficulties, worrying about our loved ones who have not been converted or have gone astray, wondering whether they will be saved or not, all we can do is to trust in God's grace and mercy, that somehow God will save them according to His grace, to His will. Amen.